Right, ladies and gentlemen, I think we're going to kick off this session now. My name is Johnny Oates, Lord Oates. I'm a member of the UK Upper House of Parliament, the House of Lords, and I'm a commissioner on the United Kingdom Hydrogen Policy Commission and a former chief of staff to our Deputy Prime Minister in our coalition government, when we did a lot of work on renewables. It's a great pleasure to be here in Barcelona for the first time in 16 years. And in fact, the last time I was here, I got engaged. So Barcelona is a place very dear to my heart. I'm hoping great things of this visit, but I think more on the policy front than perhaps the personal front. But I am absolutely delighted to be chairing this session on decarbonising land transport, road and rail transport. And part of what we're really going to look into today is how we go about that decarbonisation. Obviously, there's a large take-up of battery electric in this field, and we need to think about what is the role for hydrogen and how can it play that role most effectively. And I'm delighted that we are joined by a really expert panel. We have here to my right Sashi Annett, who is the founder and executive director of Powered by Hydrogen, which she will tell you all about, but is focused around education in the hydrogen field. We have direct from the airport, literally a minute or two ago, I think Ronald Grassman, who is the Vice President, Fuel Cell Business Development at Hyundai Motor Company. We have Daniel Kim, who's the CEO of ARC Energy, which is an Australian subsidiary of Korea Zinc, which is one of, is the largest, I believe, zinc, lead and silver producer in the world. We're also delighted to be joined by Dr. Emilio Nieto Galega, and my apologies for pronunciation there, who is the director of the Spanish National Hydrogen Centre, and last but by no means least, by Alfonso Sanchez Vicente, who is the CEO of the Madrid transport provider EMT Madrid. So I'm delighted to welcome you all here. We're going to start off with some introductory remarks from each of our panelists. And I'm going to start by asking Sashi to talk to us a bit about the importance of education and demonstration projects in driving the development of hydrogen. So Sashi.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I founded Powered by Hydrogen this year as a US-based nonprofit organization to promote green hydrogen through education, public outreach, and legislative advocacy, which are critical pieces of the hydrogen puzzle that seem to have been missing up to this point. We're still very much in the organizational stage as we navigate our way through this rapid expansion of hydrogen development. But it became clear to us early on as we defined our mission that transportation sector was where hydrogen was going to move forward most rapidly and with the most visibility. So that has become our main focus. Because after all, mobility is life. How we work, how we learn, how we travel, how we see the world, how we visit our loved ones, care for ourselves and others. Every service we depend on, every product we consume involves some aspect of mobility. Global energy consumption has increased by 1/3 since 2000 and will continue to rise. Transportation currently represents about 1/4 of global emissions. Light-duty vehicles consume more energy than all forms of freight and heavy-duty transportation combined. So it is essential that we carbonize this sector as quickly as possible in order to meet net zero goals. And I think we can all agree that we do not have until 2050. And that green hydrogen is the only solution that can bring us close to meeting those targets. Giving people options for clean transportation is the single most empowering tool they can use to lower their carbon footprint, and people truly want that choice. People need another option in clean vehicles because electric battery vehicles are not going to work for everyone. And building out the infrastructure to support that massive scaling up of public stations that would be necessary is very problematic on so many levels, not to mention the extraordinary true costs of battery production and life cycle. An important part of education is, of course, overcoming myths and misconceptions. I've often said that hydrogen has a PR problem. So at best, it's something on the far horizon, reserved for space travel or exotic applications. And at worst, it's an association with disaster. So overcoming those myths and misconceptions is a critical piece of education as we go forward. There are some who say that the time for demonstration projects is over. I do believe that projects are still essential in terms of public engagement and also in engaging legislators and giving them the tools that they need to craft effective policy. Demonstration projects have tremendous value in providing proof of concept for scalable projects. The Hydrogen Hub effort that is currently underway through the Department of Transportation in the US is tremendously exciting, and it should finally give us some more cohesion when the dust settles. But we're probably looking at anywhere from 3 to 5 years before those hubs are clearly defined and established and project funding becomes available. So while we will certainly use our best efforts to accelerate that process, we cannot afford to wait for them to figure this out, which is why the private sector has to step up and fund some of this early stage development. So I'm pleased to tell you that we've initiated our first demonstration project in collaboration with the Center for Energy and Environment at Princeton University. We identified doing a pilot hydrogen bus refueling station as the logical phase 1 project. And as Princeton is a city campus and their transit system is open to the public, it's actually going to give great visibility in the greater community. It's also ideally located near the main interstate highway corridor running up and down the East Coast. So once that refueling station is complete, we can then integrate a passenger refueling pump and then partner with hydrogen fuel cell vehicle manufacturers and ride-sharing and car-sharing applications so that the general public can start to become familiar and commercial driving in passenger vehicles, because we have 10,000 hydrogen cars on the road in California right now, but the rest of the country doesn't even know that hydrogen cars exist. So I'm happy to talk a bit more about the details of that project elsewhere. But our thought is that if we can get this viable demonstration project done with private funding, then when federal funding becomes available, we can say, here's a completed phase 1 that is ready to scale up, and we can give them a roadmap of how that could roll out based on input from local stakeholders. This project could potentially be a foundational piece of what will eventually be a hydrogen highway running along the east coast of the United States. Transitions are not easy or pretty, and it's going to take a monumental effort to make a shift of this magnitude and consequence, but we cannot afford to not get this right. I'm honored to be a part of this important conversation and inspired to be in a room of like-minded, impatient champions of green hydrogen. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much for that, Sasha. And I think that the point about the importance of public education and policymaker education is really critical. Certainly I know from being here, I've learned an enormous amount just this morning, and I thought I knew a reasonable amount of hydrogen, so there's lots of work for you to do. I wonder, Ronald, if I could turn to you now. And as I mentioned, Ronald is the Vice President of Fuel Cell Business Development at Hyundai. How do you see the competition between battery electric and fuel cell electric vehicles? Is it kind of deadly competition, or is it complementary technologies?
Yeah, thank you very much. And first of all, thanks for letting me be part of this panel. I really appreciate also inviting Hyundai as a car manufacturer to this panel. It is an important topic to talk about, and I heard many things in your statement, Sashi, that sounds very familiar to me, because we really are coming from a world of demonstration projects, and we need to do a lot of education to the public, and infrastructure is key. So you have to really convince people. So you cannot simply put a product on the road and hope that it will work out. Yeah? And now looking at the so-called competition between battery electric vehicles and hydrogen-powered vehicles, we are one of the largest manufacturers of battery electric vehicles in the world, and we are the largest manufacturer of hydrogen-powered vehicles in the world. And we don't see a competition here. This is these powertrains have complementary roles. There are individual use cases. Customers have different demands. So the higher you go in the vehicle weight and the longer you go in the vehicle traveling distance, the more reasonable it becomes to work with hydrogen. And if we look at the commercial vehicles, heavy-duty trucking and so on, there it simply makes no sense from our point of view to power such vehicles with a super heavy battery. We're talking about a battery that can weigh maybe 4 or 5 tons. And for a commercial vehicle, a fleet operator, the key is payload for such a vehicle. Of course, fuel cells are also not light, but in contrast to a battery, the only thing you have to do if you want to increase range is put more tanks. The tanks are heavier than a gasoline tank, but they're a lot lighter than putting additional cells for a battery. So in a nutshell, for us it's pretty clear. There will be a multitude of drivetrains that all work on renewables as the basis. Green hydrogen is the best way to store renewable energy long-term and to distribute it. And therefore, we think there's a very good use case for hydrogen vehicles in all different kinds of domains.
Thank you very much for that, Ronald. I should say that Toyota very kindly lent me a hydrogen car to see how they worked. But when I pointed out that I thought it was absolutely great, but it wouldn't work for me because it wouldn't fit my dog in, the representative of Toyota said, well, I shouldn't say this, but Hyundai make a vehicle that would work for you. So there you go. Your rivals were promoting you. But can I now move on to Daniel Kim, who, as I said, is CEO of Arc Energy. And as I mentioned, it's a subsidiary of Korea Zinc. And Daniel, you're very much looking at production in terms of how you use it with heavy vehicles. Perhaps you could tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, thanks, Johnny. And good afternoon, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here and alongside such a distinguished panel. So, yes, Arc Energy is a wholly owned subsidiary of Korea Zinc, which is the largest zinc producer in the world. Again, that process of refining zinc is through electrolysis. We're a very extreme use of electricity. But Arc's mandate is to decarbonise the group, starting with this, the energy supply, the Scope 2 emissions, but the Scope 1 is equally important. Korea Zinc was the first major refiner in the world to join RE100 and commit to powering its entire operations globally from renewables. And so our mandate is a global mandate, but starting with the Australian operations. And so in Australia, we have quite an integrated supply chain. We have a zinc refinery. We've also got 2 logistics businesses, both a transport and trucking business, and also a stevedoring business at the port. And so Arc's ambition, as part of that decarbonisation, it's our ambition to really become a low-cost producer of hydrogen. We talk about being an extreme user and trying to make it pervasive across the group's businesses. But we also want to stimulate and create demand in the market. But I think starting with the internal use cases, when we looked across the businesses, including whether it be the refinery and the other logistics businesses, what we found was that ultra-heavy commercial transport was the most prospective use case for near-term green hydrogen. So our initial Sun HQ hydrogen hub, which we've made a final investment decision on already, and we've got our approvals in place. We're looking to commission that by the end of this year. The use case will be 5 ultra-heavy fuel cell electric trucks, which we're procuring from Hyzon Motors. These are expected to be the largest fuel cell electric trucks in the world at the time of their deployment. In a metric tonne, they're 140-tonne rated, running in sort of triple trailer configuration. And they'll be used in a back-to-base operation, bringing the zinc ore in from the port into the refinery and then taking the finished zinc ingots out from the refinery back out to port. All up, that's about a 30-kilometre round trip, so perfect back-to-base operation for these initial fuel cell electric trucks.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. I wonder if I could now turn to you, Alfonso. As I said, Alfonso is the CEO of the Madrid transport provider, EMT Madrid. Could you tell us a bit about how you see the role of green hydrogen in the public transport sector? And just before you answer that, for people, I think it's channel 1. Yes. If you could just wait 1 second. Are we ready to go, Joe? Yep. Okay, thanks very much. Go ahead.
Muchas gracias, sobre todo por la invitación a participar aquí con agentes tan relevantes en el mundo del hidrógeno. Sin duda alguna, desde la empresa municipal de transportes de Madrid, que somos el operador global de autobús, tenemos más de 2.100 autobuses operando en la ciudad de Madrid, creemos que el hidrógeno tiene un gran futuro. Es verdad que nosotros, para transformar nuestra flota, tenemos un primer objetivo, que es una tecnología predominante en la compañía. En este momento operamos fundamentalmente con autobuses de gas natural comprimido, que están siendo sustituidos paulatinamente por autobuses de baterías. El siguiente paso que queremos dar es, una vez implementados en el mayor número posible los autobuses de baterías, el siguiente paso es ir introduciendo el hidrógeno en la compañía. Para ello hemos licitado recientemente, vamos a adjudicar la construcción de una hidrogenera en un centro de operaciones. Nosotros en la ciudad de Madrid tenemos 5 centros de operaciones, aproximadamente de 400 autobuses cada centro de operaciones, y el objetivo es construir esa hidrogenera, montar una planta fotovoltaica en el propio centro de operaciones, de manera que vamos a generar la energía verde necesaria con la planta fotovoltaica. Procederemos a generar el hidrógeno en esa planta de hidrógeno del centro de operaciones, lo comprimiremos y cargaremos a los autobuses en el centro de operaciones. Y luego consumiremos ese hidrógeno dentro de la propia ciudad de Madrid. De manera que vamos a ser, yo creo, la primera empresa de España en tener el ciclo completo dentro de nuestras propias instalaciones. Este es un proyecto que hemos lanzado en una primera fase para 10 autobuses, que estarán operativos el año que viene, y que es escalable a 20 autobuses. Ahora bien, tenemos alguna serie de problemas y que el mundo del hidrógeno, todos los que estamos aquí, tenemos que trabajar, ¿no? En primer lugar, nuestros autobuses de hidrógeno, los que vamos a comprar, son mucho más caros que los autobuses eléctricos por baterías y por supuesto, que las otras tecnologías. Por otra parte, hay otros temas que tendremos que tratar y también muy importantes, como es la eficiencia para conseguir ese hidrógeno, es decir, el consumo de energía que hay que hacer para conseguir ese hidrógeno que después tenemos en los autobuses. Perdemos eficiencia, lógicamente, en la fabricación del hidrógeno, en la compresión. Hay que tener en cuenta que nosotros vamos a comprimir a 30 bares, pero después tendremos que pasarlo a 500 bares para poder repostar a nuestros autobuses a 350 bares. Ahí hay también una pérdida de energía. Y luego, por supuesto, en la pila de combustible, pues también hay otra pérdida de eficiencia, ¿no? Y esto para nosotros es muy importante, que esas pérdidas de eficiencia que hay en todo el ciclo las podamos ir reduciendo. Y yo creo que aquí tenemos un trabajo de futuro para que el transporte público pueda utilizar el vector energético del hidrógeno como un elemento fundamental. Lógicamente, ahora mismo, compitiendo el hidrógeno con las baterías, nosotros hemos llegado Los autobuses que nos están suministrando ahora mismo de baterías eléctricas nos están permitiendo operar todo el día. Hay que tener en cuenta que un autobús de la empresa municipal de transportes hace aproximadamente al día unos 220, 230 kilómetros, y no es tanto los kilómetros recorridos, sino el tiempo que están en la calle, ¿no? Un autobús nuestro opera aproximadamente entre 16 y 18 horas todos los días. Con las baterías hemos conseguido que eso sea posible, de manera que cargamos por la noche en nuestros centros de operaciones y el autobús opera todo el día. Eso nos hace ser más eficientes en la operación, porque no hay cargas intermedias y no hay pérdidas de tiempo que supondrían más recursos humanos y más recursos de autobús propiamente dichos. El hidrógeno, como he dicho, es menos eficiente, pero nos va a ayudar mucho. Es verdad que tenemos líneas en las que tenemos que hacer más kilómetros que los que he dicho, y donde creemos que aplicaremos esos autobuses de hidrógeno que, lógicamente, permiten una mayor autonomía. Pero yo creo que ahí tenemos un trabajo importante entre todos para conseguir que el hidrógeno sea más competitivo económicamente, y esto pasa por escalarlo a grandes magnitudes, sin duda, o sea, que tengamos cada vez más autobuses y que esa producción de hidrógeno que yo he hablado en un proyecto piloto para un centro de operaciones, a la hora de escalarlo en la empresa municipal de transportes, no tenemos la voluntad de fabricar hidrógeno, todo lo contrario, lo que somos consumidores de hidrógeno. Nosotros pensamos que el hidrógeno nos debería llegar por grandes plantas de fabricación y debería llegar como en la actualidad no llega el gas natural comprimido, por tubería a nuestros centros de operaciones. Nuestro único trabajo sería comprimirlo y repostar esos autobuses. De manera que ahí tenemos otro trabajo importante, que es el que haya alianzas de la Administración con las empresas para al final conseguir esas grandes plantas en las proximidades de los centros de consumo, de manera que tampoco haya una gran, por el coste inicial, ¿no? El construir una gran red de tuberías para suministrar hidrógeno, pensamos que puede ser caro, y creemos que la forma más adecuada sería tener plantas en la proximidad de varios centros que consuman ese hidrógeno. Ese es el proyecto que tenemos nosotros pensado dentro de la empresa municipal de transportes, el proyecto piloto, y a partir de ahí pues veremos a ver cómo escalamos eso para aumentar notablemente nuestros autobuses en la flota.
Thank you very much for that, Alonso. And I wonder, finally, if I could come to you, Emilio. As I said, Emilio Nieto Gallego is the director of the Spanish National Hydrogen Centre. And I wonder if I could just ask you, we've heard of some of the challenges in the public transport sector. Could you just tell us a bit about how you see both opportunities and challenges for the road and rail sphere in terms of green hydrogen?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman, and good afternoon to everybody. It's a pleasure also to share with these estimated colleagues from the panel. I think always when I receive this question, I mean, as a first time, it's a pleasure to reply, because for me, it's the first time that here in Spain are collaborating different ministries in order to define a real strategy based on the hydrogen in that case, and try to work all together and try to ask the different stakeholders within the value chain. I mean, I think this is not common here in Spain. You know that here in Spain are familiar with the sun, the beers, and a lot of fun here, but nothing related in order to link the research with the real needs on the industry. And this is the base on this strategic roadmap. It was already defined here in the administration. Of course, we are a body, a research body, a national center who are devoted or focused 100% on the developing of the hydrogen and fuel cell. We are covering the whole value chain, and is also a body who helped the administration in order to boost this kind of roadmap. And coming to your question, in this roadmap, there are defining different objectives and different challenges. The challenges is also linked with the European ones. I mean, we are not inventing the wheel. We are, in order to define how are the different sectors where Spain is also working quite hard, and the different sector, industrial sector, who are very well known, and we are the leader on the market, and they are defined the different intermediate and final tasks and objectives in order to achieve a 2050 decarbonized economy in the future. And within these tasks, they are some related with the transport, and we are also trying to create in 2030 a maximum of 150 hydrogen refueling stations. We have now 5, only 5. We have a long way in order to achieve this kind of running. There are some, at least as far as I know, 2 different companies who are working in the different scenario in order to define where it's possible to put this hydrogen refueling station to have a very good cover of all the different distance within the country. We have also some objectives defining on the trail. Is defined a minimum of 2 commercial lines from the passengers covering with the hydrogen. They are not saying 100% of the hydrogen, they are saying an hybridation, we have time later on in order to discuss. It should be the goal, how to hybridate, how to use the hydrogen when it's the best solution, and how to use the battery or the different combinations in order to electrify. And we have also some commitments and some objectives linked to the use of the light and heavy duty transport. So they are defined a minimum of, I think, 7,500 of heavy duty trucks within the road of Spain, and also to have at least 1,500 light vehicles running on the street and try to profit this hydrogen refueling station. It should be in 2030 as a minimum stage in order to have. So I think this is a support. This is also good to see that this kind of Congress and this kind of event is also prepared and present here in Spain as a support about the different evolution of this kind of green economy based on the hydrogen. So I think there are a lot of different measures, a lot of different support, and try to force the collaboration, the public and private partnerships, who is the only way in order to move all together forward to commit on that.
Thank you very much, and thank you to all our panelists for, I think, bringing a perspective from all different sectors, which is really helpful. One question I'd like to pose to you all is, what do you see in the policy framework? And I mean, imagine this differs in different parts of the world, but overall, are there things that policymakers need to be doing to ensure that green hydrogen can play its correct role and its most effective role within the road and rail transport sphere? So I wonder, perhaps I could turn to Daniel first, and then we'll go around.
It's a good question, Johnny. I mean, in Australia, there's still a diesel fuel tax rebate, and so we'd like, we'd like to see an end to that. But I think the actual economics and the total cost of ownership for these hydrogen commercial vehicles, actually, we're not far away from parity against diesel. Now that depends on a few things, of course. I mean, fuel cell electric commercial vehicles are more expensive in terms of the initial price. I mean, our trucks are probably 2.5 times the cost of their diesel equivalent. But when you look at cost, the total cost of ownership, which includes, the cost of hydrogen, it includes O&M, it includes that residual value. It's interesting that for a lighter truck, the hydrogen supplied at the price that we can do it at, even from day one, we're pretty close to parity. Now, for the ultra heavy trucks, which we have, this is the thing, we're very keen to do that analysis and find out how far away we are. But anyway, I think there are other things which, in terms of governments, can do, and that's just stimulating the demand, frankly. And so I applaud what's happening here in Spain. I mean, locally in Australia, we're talking with the local governments around, helping them with their sort of decarbonisation pathway, and looking to transition them into the hydrogen commercial mobility, whether it be for their buses, whether it be for their garbage trucks. And we're very encouraged, actually. So this is where governments at all levels can really help build their hydrogen economies by actually stimulating those demand use cases.
Thanks very much. Alfonso, could I just ask you, I was interested in what you said about you know, how you found battery electric buses very effective for the Madrid transport system, but you're still intending to invest in hydrogen buses. Could you say a little bit about why you're doing that, and also about what perhaps the Spanish government could be doing to make it easier for you to invest in that way?
Bueno, nosotros ahora mismo estamos, como decía, cambiando la flota. Es verdad que los fondos Next Gen en este ámbito nos están ayudando. Es decir, la empresa municipal de transportes en el ámbito español se han asignado para el Ayuntamiento de Madrid 150 millones de euros para la transformación hacia las cero emisiones, y de esos 150 millones que ha recibido el Ayuntamiento de Madrid, 100 millones van a venir a la empresa municipal de transportes, 100 millones de euros. De manera que esto nos está ayudando a acelerar todo el proceso que habíamos iniciado. Pero no solo eso, las apuestas de la política del Ayuntamiento de Madrid, definiendo nuevas zonas de bajas emisiones, la estrategia de sostenibilidad ambiental también definida por el Ayuntamiento de Madrid, nos están llevando, como decía, a acelerar el proceso, de manera que este mismo año, a final de año, en Madrid ya no circularán autobuses de la empresa municipal de transportes impulsados por gasoil. Es decir, a partir de este momento, toda nuestra flota, a finales de este año, será verde. Es verdad que la mayor parte de la flota será impulsada por gas natural comprimido, pero ya con una parte importante de autobuses eléctricos por batería, y con ese impulso que le queremos dar en los próximos años de hidrógeno. De manera que en 2027 aproximadamente un 35% de nuestra flota, un 35% de la flota va a ser cero emisiones, y tenemos previsto que en 2033 el 100% de la flota sea cero emisiones dentro de la Ciudad de Madrid. Lo que tenemos que ver bien es cuál va a ser el mix adecuado entre, como decía anteriormente, entre autobús de batería y autobús de hidrógeno. Yo creo que es que el hidrógeno, con el impulso que le vamos a dar, los fondos Next Gen, que también nos van a ayudar a impulsarlo, este proyecto que contaba, que va a ser importante y que otras empresas españolas del sector están también haciendo en sus respectivas ciudades, y pues con ese esfuerzo que vamos a hacer entre todos, yo creo que el hidrógeno va a tener una penetración importante dentro del transporte público de viajeros. Y hay una clara apuesta, como decía, de los gobiernos españoles, tanto locales como en la administración regional, como en la administración del Estado, para ir a esas cero emisiones a las que todos queremos llegar en un plazo corto. Ahora mismo nosotros ya, dentro de nuestro plan estratégico de la compañía, y para conseguir esos objetivos, ya no estamos comprando autobuses que no sean de cero emisiones. Recientemente, la semana pasada, adjudicamos 150 autobuses eléctricos por un valor cercano a los 100 millones de euros, y en esa línea vamos a seguir trabajando. En las próximas semanas licitaremos los autobuses que decía de hidrógeno, y vamos a seguir con esa evolución, y toda la inversión, como digo, irá a las cero emisiones, contando siempre con el apoyo del Ayuntamiento de Madrid, que al final es nuestro accionista único y que nos apoya fundamentalmente para conseguir este objetivo.
Thank you very much. Amelia, could I ask you what your thoughts are about the policy environment? And I wonder if you might touch perhaps on rail transport as well, and where it may be or may not be appropriate to use hydrogen there, and what governments, whether it's the Spanish government or at European level, or indeed, in my case, for the UK government, should be doing to stimulate that part of decarbonisation.
Yeah, of course. I mean, before we are enter specifically on the rail application, I mean, this is a question that always we are belong to the administration, that always the people ask you, you as administration, how is possible for you to help the industry to move forward? And I think this is the sense behind the strategy, as I told you before in my exposition. I mean, the administration need to force and try to find the synergies between the different stakeholders. and try to put all together in order to build, let's say, the hub of the project, and in that case of the hydrogen, in order to work on the different part of the value chain. I mean, and the second step is use this kind of solution also for their possibilities, let's say. I mean, Alfonso was explaining before how Madrid was making in order to propose the new buses, electric buses, or either battery or either the fuel cell. This kind of things is also something that the administration need to force, try to use this as an example in order to show the industry that is feasible, and all the needs in order to cover the whole value chain in that sense, for instance, the hydrogen refueling station, the permitting, the facility of the licensate, all the different process, these kind of things, this is something feasible for the administration, and is the only possibility for them in order to help the industry. Of course, giving money, but you know the administration has not enough money for covering and doing everything. So the things and the demand from the industry needs to be the commitment and the strategy for them in order to work together to move forward. And in that case, coming to your question from the rail, this is something that is already happening in the rail. I mean, we are working in the center in order to develop 3 different projects, 3 different hybridization, and we will have time in order to discuss with you later on, because we are using electric with hydrogen, I mean catenary with the hydrogen. We are in another different composition using battery and hydrogen, and in the second part we have also introducing the biogas, using blending with the hydrogen. With these 3 different alternatives, you can cope a decarbonized sector and try not to spend as much as money that is needed in order to have a high-speed train investment. I mean, try to electrify using hydrogen, batteries, and also biofuels. And this is something that is behind the administration, and try to boost here in Spain, at least to achieve at the end, in 2030, the minimum of 2 lines, but I know for sure that it should be more than 2 lines, but this is a minimum, and the most important for me is the commitment of the industry, and also working together with the administration from the different permitting issues.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Emilio. Sashi, just before I turn to you, and then I'll come to Ronald. After I've done that, I'm going to come to the audience to see if you've got any questions, so if you want to be thinking about that. But Sashi, if you could just tell us a bit about what it would be that you would like policymakers to do in terms of moving on the kind of education field in which you operate.
Well, I think for hydrogen in general, policymakers need to be reminded that a hydrogen vehicle is an electric vehicle, because hydrogen seems to be left out of a lot of the legislation and funding opportunities. The emphasis has been on electric. I actually had the pleasure of meeting our Secretary of Transportation, Pete Buttigieg, recently, and he was very excited and enthusiastic about hydrogen, but acknowledged that they really hadn't put very much focus on that in the DOT. But the good news is that there is now a joint office of Department of Energy and Transportation, so that's the first time that those 2 offices are going to be working together. And he was optimistic that we would be seeing some opportunities and funding coming out of that joint office now that it was established. I think at the state and local level, we need to see more work done on actual infrastructure and safety and regulation, opening up the alternative fuel corridors so that we can start to build out these hydrogen highways. And we need to see the incentives and the production tax credits for hydrogen production and vehicles, the same way that we did so successfully with other renewables like wind and solar.
Brilliant, thank you very much. And Ronald, could I just lastly turn to you? We heard from both Daniel and Alfonso about the costs of hydrogen vehicles, albeit, you know, obviously much heavier vehicles than I think Hyundai probably produce. But could you tell us a bit about, one, what you see as the prospects for bringing down those sort of costs? And secondly, again, what policymakers can do to help in that process?
Absolutely. So a lot of what I heard is totally in line with what we think. So Daniel, you said these vehicles are expensive, but costs are coming down. And if you look at a fuel cell electric vehicle, it's an electric vehicle, number one. So it shares many components with battery electric vehicles. And also the cost is bound in a lot of standard automotive technologies, in production technologies. You have pumps, you have control units, you have wiring harnesses. That's classic drivetrain engineering, actually. So most of the cost that we see is actually bound in the process and not so much in the material. So therefore, the cost progression, when we come to higher numbers of fuel cell systems and the other components that you need, will go down quite a bit. Personally, what I think is important for local and federal governments is to create an ecosystem where hydrogen can work. So focusing the attention less at incentives to buy vehicles. This was great in a phase where we did a lot of demonstration, but looking more at creating an environment where you can build up infrastructure that is robust, that is customer friendly, that's available 24/7. And ideally also work on the side of hydrogen production and distribution, maybe by incentivizing to bring down the total cost of ownership to a level where consumers or customers can say, oh, this is actually a viable option. So I think this is the biggest impact that we could make is looking more at the environment, the ecosystem for hydrogen.
Johnny, I mean, just picking up on Roland's point about the ecosystem, which is very valid. I mean, I think in Australia, we've been very fortunate, both the federal and then the provincial level government has actually supported our project with grant funding. And a lot of this actually is an acknowledgement of just how high and where the hydrogen cost curves at the moment. They're very prohibitive. And a lot of customers we talk to, or prospective customers we talk to, I mean, they are very keen to transition, but they don't want to pay for the capital cost of that transition. But by backing a project like ours where we're producing that green hydrogen, and again, with us being able to increase that level of concessional funding, allows us to bring the cost of hydrogen down. It also allows customers to transition without having to pay for that capital cost to transition.
Brilliant, thanks very much. And now, in the few minutes we've got left, are there any questions that any members of the audience would like to ask our panel? Yes, a gentleman there.
Hi, Dominic Eagleton from the NGO Global Witness. Yeah, I just wanted to ask the panel if they think there's a risk, perhaps, of the green hydrogen industry kind of gaining a bad reputation, let's say, if green hydrogen is used in sectors where it displaces renewable electricity. Because, I mean, we've seen other industries go the same way that were, set out to tackle environmental problems, but through kind of, for various reasons, ended up, doing the opposite and, increasing greenhouse gas emissions and slowing down, actually, the energy transition. So I just wondered if any of the panelists feel that there is a risk of that happening because, of course, we know that a lot of the applications that we've talked about here or have been talked about are, well, a lot of them at the bottom rung of the hydrogen ladder.
Thanks very much. Who would like to tackle that first?
Well, maybe one short statement from a car manufacturer. For us, green hydrogen is just another form of renewable energy. It's just a renewable energy put in a form that we can store it long term and distribute it easier. So I don't see that there is a risk of replacing renewables by moving towards green hydrogen in mobility.
Thanks. Does anybody else?
No, I mean, it's only to add that this, I fully agree with your statement. I mean, this is, let's say, a seasonal storage of the energy. The advantages of the hydrogen is you can store the energy whatever you want, how long you want, without losing nothing. And once the demand is increasing and you need more energy that you are producing, you can use this directly. So I don't see these risks. I mean, this is why I was insisting at the beginning of the talk. I mean, we need to develop all the different solutions available in the market, all the different sustainable solutions who can achieve the decarbonize. And in some cases, battery electric vehicles are the best choice, and in other cases it's the hydrogen, or in another cases it's also the biogas, using the biomass and this power to ease that tomorrow we will have some different talks regarding this. So I think this is also a risk, but altogether we have to go with that.
I would agree with that. I think we do need an all-hands-on-deck approach, and any time that you can have cross-pollination, you're increasing efficiency and value.
Thanks very much.
Dominic, I think the reality is that you cannot electrify ultra-heavy transport. So, you know, when we're talking of the class of trucks, 140-ton payload, you know, the weight of the batteries will negate from the payload. And then, you know, the other thing is high utilization vehicles. These are the commercial vehicles which you need to run 24/7. It doesn't make sense. You can't take them offline and recharge. And in our case, where we've got these ships coming at the port, you know, we get smacked the demurrage charge every day. So when those ships are in, these trucks are running 24/7 for 9 days straight. So that's where, again, the use case for hydrogen fuel cell is a really neat one.
Thank you. Would you like to come in, Alfonso?
Sí, yo comparto las opiniones de todos los que estamos hoy en la mesa. Yo creo que es importante, por ejemplo, hablando en la materia que me compete, que es el autobús, pues en distancias medias o en distancias largas incluso, no tanto en la operación en la propia ciudad, sino saliendo al extrarradio de las ciudades o en larga distancia. Desde luego el hidrógeno, comparto lo que has dicho, tiene un valor especial en el sentido de que se pueden desarrollar muchos kilómetros con la carga que el propio vehículo lleva en este caso en el autobús, cosa que no sería en este momento, a día de hoy, por la tecnología, no es posible con las baterías, ¿no? Sí que para el autobús en ciudad es muy competitivo, pero a medida que nos vamos alejando y cubrimos grandes distancias o medias distancias, es muchísimo mejor el hidrógeno, y por tanto ahí yo creo también que va a cumplir una labor fundamental, en la unión de ciudades cercanas o incluso en la larga distancia, en la medida que el propio autobús es competitivo con otros modos de transporte como pueda ser el ferrocarril.
Thanks very much. Are there any more questions from the audience? Yes, gentleman here.
Thank you. I'm Giampiero Nacci from the European Bank for Construction Development. Actually, it's a question that follows up a bit on this current conversation, because I sort of acknowledge the position about the need to look at different technology solutions, but at the same time, if we look at the manufacturing sector, so the producer of the technology and the systems, we're talking about technologies which are quite R&D intensive. So what is your expectation? This will bring further consolidation in the industry, or it will, we'll see new entrants in the market? So I'm really asking from the supply chain perspective, from the manufacturing perspective. Thank you.
Would you like to go, Emilio?
Yeah, I mean, talking about research, and we are a national hydrogen center, so I mean, alkaline electrolyzer it was in the market from the last 250 years, more or less. Polymeric is the one who are using also in the road transport. They are only 50 years, but in the last 2, 3, maximum 5 years, it was putting on the same level that the alkaline. And of course, both of them are for producing hydrogen, but not are the same. And they are competitive now. I mean, not in the cost, because we need to start the economy of scale in order to produce as a line and not with the name and surname of anyone. So this is something that we all need in order to start working and try to fast and boost the production. All the rest of the production technologies, let's say, are and I agree with you, in a low TRLs. I mean, for instance, the high temperature electrolyzer is also need minimum 10, 15 years in order to reach the same level and to reach the market in a good position, let's say, with a CAPEX and OPEX in a logical sense in order to give you a green numbers, you know. And also the new one, and most of you can know, is the anionic, you know. This is a blending between the alkaline and the polymeric electrolyzer. And this is also a more lower TRL than the high temperature electrolyzer. So this is only in order to give you that some of the technologies are already within the market. They are TRL 9. They are equipments already in the market, but the companies need to increase the number and need to produce faster and cheaper. And this is what it should be one of the results of this boost of this green economy, and try to use the European funds and all the different strategies for all the different countries.
Thanks very much, Emilio. I'm conscious we're coming towards the end of our time, so what I'm going to ask is if in responding you could also make your sort of any final points you'd like to make in summary as well, and we'll go around the whole panel starting with Ronald, and Emilio, we will give you a chance if you want to make any closing comments as well. So, Ronald.
Thank you very much. So then I will just follow up on the question, because I represent a manufacturer. What if we look at the fuel cell and a hydrogen tank, and in comparison a battery, what do we see? In both cases, we see energy storage and energy conversion. In one case, it's combined in one module or in one system. In the other case, it's two individual modules. The rest of the vehicle is more or less the same. So you have the same mechanical platform, you have the same electric drivetrain, you have the same transmission. So these are like siblings. And honestly, we think here the use case determines what is the best technology and the most cost-efficient way to produce electric vehicles. So let's face it, internal combustion engine is dead. Electrification will be key for mobility. But if it's going to be the power provided by hydrogen or batteries, that is, to my point of view, not a showstopper for having both technologies in the market.
Thanks very much. Amelia, do you have any sort of final remarks you'd like to make before we close?
Only one phrase, because I was using too many times. I mean, for me, the public and private partnership are key in order to move all together forward and try to commit on all the different goals and commitments.
Thanks very much. Alfonso.
Bueno, comparto lo que se ha dicho desde la industria. Yo creo que lo que he venido comentando, ¿no? Hay que escalar, crecer en el uso del hidrógeno para que sea cada vez más competitivo. Tampoco creo que haya que descartar otros modos de propulsión para los vehículos, porque cada ciudad, cada región, cada país puede tener necesidades distintas, pero sin duda nosotros desde Madrid y desde la empresa municipal de transportes vamos a apostar por el hidrógeno verde como ese segundo modo de propulsión de nuestros autobuses en el futuro próximo, y esperamos que en 2033, cuando ya tengamos el 100% de la flota cero emisiones, un porcentaje importante sean de hidrógeno verde, y que bueno, pues van a dar la calidad del aire que la ciudad de Madrid merece.
I simply say that, I mean, if we're any chance to get to net zero, every industry sector's got to play its part. The transport sector in Australia is the third largest emitter, and at a time when we're supposed to be reducing emissions, transport sector and emissions in Australia have actually increased 63% since 1990. Now, you can electrify smaller passenger vehicles, but you can't electrify the ultra heavies, which is, for me, it's not a case of either or, it's and I suppose my other point is that the future of hydrogen commercial mobility is now. It's happening. Again, our fuel cell trucks will be on the road by the end of this year. And my final point is that it really does take both private, public, think tanks, policymakers to work closely together to accelerate this transition.
Sashi.
I agree completely. I think that it has to be about complementing and collaborating, not competing. And if you look back and you look at the journey of solar, for example, you know, it wasn't viable, and there were a lot of naysayers who said it could never happen. So we are in an incredibly exciting time for hydrogen, and we need to start funding these breakthrough technologies and accelerate this because the stakes are higher now. So we don't have that window and that luxury of time.
Thank you very much, and thank you to all our panel. I think that's a great point to finish on, that what we're talking about is collaboration rather than competition, and I think our team here today have shown that very much themselves, collaborating rather than competing, but showing all the different ways in which hydrogen can play a role, but alongside a variety of other technologies. I think it's very important, but clear that green hydrogen does have a key role within that sector. I think also what came across is there's a lot that policymakers need to think about providing frameworks and some sense of certainty going forward. And the last point, which is related to that, which is really clear, is infrastructure, because there is a bit of a chicken and egg issue here, and that clearly has got to be solved, and policymakers have to play their part in that alongside private sector, etc. But certainly I found it an absolutely fascinating discussion. I'm really grateful to the audience and to all members of our panel, and I hope we can express our thanks for them. Thank you very much.